Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be comparing the Nike React Metcon Turbo to the Nike Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. So four major construction differences between each of these models include number one, their insole constructions. So in the Nike React Metcon Turbo and the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, they have similar insoles to an extent. So with both of these shoes, what give them their versatile, stable feel, especially when you're lifting, doing more athletic style training, is their insoles. So in both models, you have thicker insoles designed with Nike React foam. So as you can see, the thickness is pretty similar. Both models feature a slightly more rigid midfoot for additional support, but the major difference between both of these shoes' insoles is in the Zoom Air Packet. So in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, you have an additional Zoom Air Packet up here in the forefoot. It is designed to give this shoe a little bit more pop when you're training on the forefoot, when doing double unders, plyos, etc. And then over here in the React Metcon Turbo, you just have a straight up forefoot built with Nike React foam. Is one necessarily better than the other? We'll talk about it in the performance section, but that is a pretty big noticeable difference between each of these shoes. The second major difference is the midfoot wrap of each model. So in the Nike React Metcon Turbo, the midfoot wrap did not exactly do what it was designed to do. So this midfoot wrap used on both models is designed to give the shoe like a highly maneuverable feel and create a nice disassociation between the forefoot and heel outsole. In the React Metcon Turbo, we had a material that was like a TPU/rubber blend, and it was designed to assist with rope climbs and give you a little bit of extra bite. That's great in theory, but this midfoot did not really do its job for rope climbing very well, and so a lot of folks actually did not like this shoe for rope climbing and they wouldn't use it for that. In the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, we have a slightly less rigid layer here, and it feels to be a little bit more rubbery. After a couple of uses, this actually gives you a nice bite on rope climbs, so the midfoot constructions are a pretty big difference in regard to the performance, but just the overall fit and feel of the shoe. In the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, this midfoot material moves pretty well, and it does have a nice rubbery feel to it, whereas in the React Metcon Turbo, it had more of like this rigid plasticky feel. The third major difference between each of these models' constructions is their upper construction. So in the React Metcon Turbo, we had the split upper. So over here on the medial side, running from the forefoot up through the midfoot back here to the heel, we had more of this knit material with synthetic overlays, and then we had the square mesh upper on the forefoot and midfoot running on the lateral side of the shoe. Honestly, I did like the upper on this model. I wish it would have been a little bit more rigid in nature with a bit more structure throughout the midfoot, but as a whole, I did like the durability you got with the synthetic overlay up here in the forefoot and toe box. In the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, we have a full mesh upper covering the toe box, and then we have this external midfoot cage that kind of locks down the midfoot. So the laces are inside of this cage, and it really helps give this shoe a nice structured feel through the midfoot, which is something I thought lacked a little bit in the React Metcon Turbo. And then looking at the heels between these shoes, in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, the boot comes up a tiny bit higher. It actually hugs a little bit more than the React Metcon Turbo, and that's also why this model can be kind of a pain to break in, especially for malleolus rub, but the boot does come up a little bit higher and it really locks down that heel. In the React Metcon Turbo, we had a lower boot construction and it was a little bit softer, so the break-in process was a little bit easier in the shoe. Honestly, both boots I think do pretty well. You do get a little bit more support though in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, especially after you break them in. The fourth major difference between these models' constructions is just how they fit and feel. With the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, it feels like a little bit more rigid. It feels like more of a cleat, in my opinion, that has a bit more structure to it. So both shoes form fit really well, but with the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, it just feels like it has a little bit more structure in regard to the entirety of the build of the shoe. In the React Metcon Turbo, especially once this model broke in, it is a little bit more flimsy and flexible, which I know isn't for everybody. So that is a construction difference to note, because that is how basically the outsole, midfoot, and upper all interact with one another to give you the fit and feel of the shoe when you are training. Now, let's talk about the performance of each of these models. So in discussing the performance of these two shoes, I'm going to break this section into three different parts. I'm going to talk about which is the better shoe for CrossFit, which is the better shoe for lifting, and which is the better shoe for more versatile style training or more athletic style training. Now, in the context of CrossFit, which model is better? So I think if you've ever trained with both of these shoes, you definitely probably agree with me that the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 is the better model. So a couple of reasons why. Number one, the midfoot support is going to be way better for rope climbs. You actually get a nice bite with this midfoot support, and as you break them in more, it actually, I think, gets a little bit more grippy. So for rope climbs, this is definitely the better model. Plus, I do like that forefoot Zoom Air Packet. It gives you a nice pop when you're doing box jumps, plyometrics, double unders, jump rope, whatever it might be when you're on the forefoot training. You get a nice level of pop with this shoe. shoe. Also, the shoe does have a pretty good level of stability. So in the context of being a more well-rounded CrossFit shoe, the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 is a really strong choice. Now the React Metcon Turbo, it's an okay shoe for CrossFit, but the lack of midfoot support for rope climbing is a pretty big knock on the shoe's performance. So for CrossFit, the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 is going to be the better option. So when it comes to lifting, both of these shoes are pretty neck and neck. And honestly, if you're just going to be using them for more recreational lifting, barbell lifting, free weight training, I wouldn't necessarily stress about either or. And if you could find a really good deal on the React Metcon Turbo, that would probably be a good call because you'll save a little bit of money, because in the context of stability and versatility in the gym, both of these shoes are going to perform pretty similarly. The outsole builds in regard to the rubbers used on the forefoot and heel are similar. And with the overall insole construction, sans the Zoom Air Packet, you're going to have an equal level of stability and versatility with both of these shoes. Now, when it comes to athletic style training and more versatile training, this one's tough because I do have a favorite, but it's really hard to say because I like the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 more, but with the breakdown issues that I had in the toe box on one of my models during one of my plyo sessions, it makes me hesitant to recommend this model for everybody and to say that there's never going to be a durability issue with your shoe. Now I am testing a second pair at the moment right now, so I will have more data on the long-term durability of these shoes so I can hopefully update my review accordingly, and hopefully that first time was just a one-off occasion. But the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 I do like a little bit better for more versatile training because with that Zoom Air Packet, you do get a nice level of pop in the shoe, and with the reworked midfoot support and with the overall structured build of the shoe, it just feels so athletic. So I do like this model a lot. And now that's not to say that the React Metcon Turbo doesn't work for versatile training. I just have a little bit more of a favoritism towards the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 because how it fits and with how that forefoot interacts with plyo specifically and more explosive bouts of training. But the React Metcon Turbo is a good shoe, and especially if you want to save money and just use them for like HIIT training or more versatile training with some lifting here and there, this can be a really viable option to look into. So when it comes to sizing and fit differences between both of these models, honestly, you should be safe going true to size in both of these shoes. The lengths both are very similar and they both fit true, and the widths are what I would describe as like more of a neutral width. Now again, in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, you do have a higher boot, so I would highly suggest wearing longer socks when breaking the shoe in, just to prevent any blisters, especially if you are prone to getting any rub under the malleolus when you're breaking shoes in. But overall, I think most folks should be safe going true to size in both of these models, and it's nice that Nike didn't change the sizing on the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 compared to the React Metcon Turbo. All right, now let's go over the weight, heel to toe drop, and insoles in both of these shoes. So in the Nike React Metcon Turbo, we have a weight of 11.9 ounces for my size 10 shoe. In the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, we have a weight of 12.5 ounces. Both of these models are said to likely have a 4mm heel to toe drop per Nike support team, and with both models, once again, you do have removable insoles. However, if you do have custom orthotics or insoles in your shoes and you plan to use them in these models, I would suggest actually looking into other models because you're either going to have to layer those insoles on top of these thick insoles, or you'll have to use those insoles in the shoe by itself, and with the overall flexibility and lack of material separating basically the internal construction of the shoe from the ground and the insole you're going to be using, it honestly would not make these shoes worth it if you plan to use your own insoles and take out the insoles that come with both of these shoes. All right, now let's do a construction side by side of the Nike React Metcon Turbo and the Nike Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. So up here on the toe box in each of these shoes, you have an extended outsole layer that wraps up the shoe. Now, when it comes to the upper in the toe box of each of these models, this is what I would suggest keeping an eye on in regard to durability of each of these shoes. In the React Metcon Turbo, we have a split upper. So we have a knit blend over here with synthetic overlays, and then a square knit mesh upper on the lateral side. We also have an internal toe guard on the lateral side of this shoe. Over here in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, we have a full mesh upper. And now I mentioned this in my full review, and I'd highly suggest checking that out if you haven't yet, but I had some stress rips actually show up in my first model of Zoom Metcon Turbo 2s, and that was during a plyometric session where my toes were hitting the end of the toe box. We have a lower internal toe guard around the big toe here and the inside of the shoe, but I think just above these toe guards, these stress rips start to show up. So if you plan to do a lot of plyos in your Zoom Metcon Turbo 2s, keep an eye on this and keep an eye on how tight you're tightening these. Really lock down your foot so you don't slide forward in this model. Once again, I am testing a second pair just to see if this is a one-off case or if it's something that we should all be a little bit conscious of in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. Looking at the midfoot construction here, we have 5 eyelets that run up the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. These eyelets sit inside of this internal cage here, so as you can see, we have like a light layering of materials. You can see my finger through this, and we have another layer inside. That helps provide you with a nice midfoot security in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, and that's also why I think people like this model's overall structure and feel, because this midfoot cage really locks down the foot. In the React Metcon Turbo, we have 5 eyelets that run up as well. We have the loop eyelets over here on the lateral side, and then we have traditional eyelets here on the medial side. You get a good amount of midfoot security in this shoe as well, and you do have that knit layer that runs all the way through the midfoot, through the heel, and then that mesh layer over here. But again, the shoe does have a little bit more flexibility through the upper, and I think that could be a turnoff for some athletes and lifters, especially as the shoe gets worn and broken in a little bit more. Looking at the heels of each shoe, in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, the heel comes up a little bit higher. It is a little bit more rigid in nature, so if you do like actually having a little bit more ankle support, the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 can be a pretty good option to explore. In the React Metcon Turbo, the boot's a little bit softer and thicker in nature. It doesn't take as long to break in, and overall, both shoes' boots I think are pretty good. But if you do like having boots that really lock down that heel, then I do think the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2's boot will lock your heel down a little bit more. However, again, be conscious of the break-in process of this shoe, and I would suggest just wearing longer socks when breaking this model in. Looking at the heel construction itself, we do have that plastic TPU heel clip on both models for handstand push-ups, and both models have a pretty good structure to their boot. You do get a little bit more rigidity over here in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. Turning over the shoes and looking at their outsoles. So both models have similar rubber materials on the forefoot and heel. So basically both shoes have this disassociated outsole, so this midfoot layer separates the forefoot from the heel. And in each of the shoes, you have a sticky rubber up here on the forefoot and a slightly more firm rubber back here on the heel. That is similar with the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. And then looking at the midfoot constructions, we have a diamond tread patterning here on the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. It is a little bit more rubber in nature, it feels. And then in the React Metcon Turbo, we have more of like this zigzag structure going through the midfoot, and it doesn't do as good of a job at providing a nice bite on rope climbs, because I think with these bigger rigid layers here, they kind of slip more than actually bite the rope. And then looking at the tongues of both of these shoes, so we have similar tongues in regard to the materials used. So we have thin mesh tongues with synthetic overlays in both of these models. They both have these like flared left and right sides over here. Be conscious of when you're pulling the shoe on, of pulling on both of these sides. You don't want this tongue to rip really easily. And then something I do like about the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2's tongue is we do have a loop to help lock this tongue down. Both of these tongues are gusseted in nature. And then looking at the insoles of each of these shoes, as I'm probably going to struggle to take them out, in the Nike React Metcon Turbo and the Nike Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, once again, we have a similar layer of foam used in both insoles. So the Nike React foam is very similar in regard to the thickness and material used in both shoes. We have a little bit of midfoot structure here on both of these models. And then in the Zoom Metcon Turbo 2, once again, we do have this Zoom Air Packet up here in the forefoot. Now that is a feature that a lot of folks have loved thus far, but overall, you are going to get a similar level of stability and versatility with both of these shoes' insoles. If you have any additional construction questions on either of these models, I would highly suggest checking out my individual reviews, or you can drop a comment down below and I will try to answer whatever you have. All right, guys, that wraps up this comparison of the Nike React Metcon Turbo to the Nike Zoom Metcon Turbo 2. Both of these shoes are acquired taste. I don't think that either of these models are going to resonate with every single lifter and athlete, but if you do like a more athletic style shoe, then I think both of these models could be worth looking into. If you plan to do mostly CrossFit with some lifting in your shoes with some athletic style training, the Nike Zoom Metcon Turbo 2 is a really good option. And if you want to save a little bit of money and you just plan to lift and do some versatile training in your shoes, the React Metcon Turbo can be an awesome option. If you have additional questions on either of these shoes, hit me in the comments below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, guys, drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.